understand there's about 80,000 South Sudanese in Israel. You mentioned today that Hamas is going to Sudan, and I read someplace Al-Qaeda. They're probably all over the place and next door. But do you see any connection in this with regard to Israel and the behavior of the Sudanese and how you have to support them in Israel?
So, Jerry,
answer it any way that you want.
Sure. First of all, facts-wise, let me correct 3.
Okay.
Don't call them South Sudanese because the overwhelming majority of the African migrant workers in Israel are Eritreans. Now, the reason why that's so important, it sounds like semantics, is that Sudanese are refugees. Eritreans are not. Eritreans are migrant workers. That's the term that we use. Israelis call them all Sudanim, as if it's all, that's a pejorative term in Israel right now. But if we're giving them they don't realize that if you call them all Sudanim, then they all have to stay. And you do not kick out refugees. So Sudan is at war, therefore they're refugees. Eritrea is not at war, therefore they're not. And there are not 80,000, there are 60,000, and it's going down. Because 0 are entering the country since Netanyahu insisted on the fence between Israel and Egypt being built, and it was completed a few days before the election in Israel. And I know, because I went in a helicopter with him where he went and bragged about completing the fence. And so since then there have been nobody coming, and many have been leaving because what's happened is it's become harder to employ them. They've been cracking down on that. And Israel has offered them all large sums of money to leave. And in addition to that, they've also decided that rather than just offer them a fish, they've offered to teach them to fish. And they have all kinds of work enrichment programs that they offer them for free if they promise to leave afterward. And then that way, when they go back to Sudan, or wherever, Eritrea, they then have a way of making money. And so that's why if you go to the capital of Eritrea, whose name I forget, the rich neighborhood there is known colloquially as Tel Aviv. And so are they connected to the fact that you connected, I didn't say Hamas was going there or Hezbollah, I said that the Muslim Brotherhood is in power of Sudan, and that's still true.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I have one question, I guess, on a social question, which is when, I forgot his name, won the Nobel Prize, and one of the issues that came up was the cost of living in Israel. And the reason he went to California was that he couldn't afford to live in the land of Israel. And I have a lot of friends who are Olim or were raised in Israel and are, what's on their mind is not the war and peace, but is cost of living and cost of housing in particular. So would you mind some optimism on that?
It's a little harder. The satire page of Yediot Ahronot had quotes from the winners of the Nobel Prize in California saying, wow, with the prize money I could finally buy an apartment in Tel Aviv. And it is a very serious problem. I mean, there's a brain drain problem that Israel doesn't provide enough money to scientists to give them research grants that allow them to stay, and so when they get an offer from Stanford, they're going to take it. Now there is, just on that, there's a silver lining that fewer and fewer Israelis are leaving to the United States and to Europe, but it's not because of Israel doing anything, it's because the economies in the United States and Europe have gone down so much. And so with that, the numbers of Israelis leaving have gone down. But regarding the cost of living, Israel is the third largest gap between rich and poor out of any Western nation after Mexico and the country just to the north of Mexico. And that's a problem. The cost of living is way too high. It shouldn't cost so much for Bamba, that's cheaper in America. My friend Benji Lovett wants to import Bamba from America to sell it in Israel cheaper. And it shouldn't cost so much to take my daughter to see the Smurf movie, highest grossing film in Israel in many years, which is fascinating. And there's a whole, sociological thing with that, with the kibbutzim that the Smurfs were on, and the blue and white, and fighting the evil, and there's a whole connection there of why Israelis love Smurfs. But that wasn't your question. The housing crisis is going to be going on until they make it much harder for Americans to buy, and French, to buy homes in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv that are empty. And so there are steps that are being done in that regard. The other thing that has to happen is to be allowed to build in Yehuda and Shomron freely, because that way there'll be a lot more housing available in the suburbs of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And right now, I don't see that happening. Whenever the right is in power in Israel, they restrain the building there a lot more than when the left is in power, ironically. And so in that regard, the housing prices will continue going up. As someone who owns a 4-bedroom in Jerusalem, that's not such a bad thing for me when I want to sell it. But it's very hard for a lot of people, and it's not going to be changing anytime soon. Certain products, though, Naftali Bennett, as the Minister of the Economy and Trade, is doing things to lower the cost of living by increasing the amount of products that are open to competition from abroad. It used to be only Israel, and that's why the cost was so high. So there are certain things that the cost of living will go down because of steps being taken by the current government. But in housing, not so much. And even if they do what they're trying to do, which is to build a lot more and remove bureaucracy, that still won't change things in Tel Aviv because there's nowhere to build anyway. And in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is surrounded on 3 sides by places where we're limited, in which we can't build. You build more in the Negev, absolutely. You move there.
Nevesh B'Nevesh has to go south, if anyone's interested.
They're building trains. You know, they used to build factories in the Negev. It didn't work to get people to move there, and the companies didn't want to be there. So what they're doing is they're building trains and expanding the Trans-Israel Highway, and that way people can live in the Negev.
My name's Anna. You spoke about the problem with Olmert's offer. He offered everything, and they wanted it. Do you think the average person in Israel still thinks that it's about land?
It's about land. Okay, what's your name, ma'am?
Anna.
Anna. So, if you want to know what the average person in Israel thinks, they're fascinating, the numbers. The majority of Israelis are in favor of 2 states for 2 peoples. The majority of Israelis, when they're asked are they in favor of dividing Jerusalem, will say no. The majority of Israelis, when asked are in favor of giving up 100% of the land with land swaps, will say no. The majority of Israelis, if they're asked will they take in any Palestinian refugees, will say no. Pretty much anything that would be in any kind of peace agreement with the Palestinians, Israelis are against. And your question, do the majority of Israelis think that the conflict is about land? I haven't seen that one asked lately. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a few questions.
What's your name?
Dan.
Yeah.
You have China and Russia supporting Iran. Both countries have restive Muslim populations, and they're in close proximity to Iran. So why do they support their nuclear program? Second question is, of course it can happen, and Jewish history has shown it has happened. But if Iran drops a nuclear bomb on Israel, so of course they're going to destroy the Israeli state.
You heard Lev, they would destroy, a lot more than that.
Exactly, to destroy all their holy sites, plus kill God knows how many other Muslims in the surrounding area, and be subject to a nuclear retaliation. So what purpose does a nuclear weapon have for them?
Okay,
And then I have a
there's
question.
not another one yet, because, no, let me finish before you ask the question to Lev. I can only remember 3 at a time, and there actually were 3.
Number 2.
No, because the first one was China and Russia, which is different answers. The third one is easy. They don't care about destroying Muslim holy sites. And it was Bernard Lewis, the professor from Princeton, who said that unlike with Russia, that mutually assured destruction was a deterrent. With the Iranians, it's an incentive. So that answers question number 3. Question number 2 was Russia. Russia will do everything to promote itself as a superpower, and if that means building up Iran and Syria as well, they're fine with it, because the enemy is not, even though they're closer, the enemy is not Iran, the enemy is America. And we saw how now that's actually working in Israel's favor, which it never was before. They weren't building up Iran in order to hurt Israel, but Israel was being hurt by the fact that Russia wanted to promote itself as a superpower against the United States. And yet now that the Russians are the alternative for the moderate countries in the Middle East that are upset with America, now it's working in Israel's favor that there is an alternative to the United States, even though we ourselves won't turn to that alternative. China cares about money, and only money. Those are the answers to your 3 questions. You want to ask a question to Lev?
Yeah.